today. Our Storyhouse Live series tonight is about sleeping soundly, and that's just not about our little people, but also looking after our own well-being as caregivers. Our sleep champions in each of our services and our educators are guided by Nat to ensure the Storyhouse educators are knowledgeable, not only about safe sleep practices, but also about supporting your little one's emotional learning when they're settling to sleep. Nat will be sharing her expertise with us tonight, so please feel free to put in the chat box, and we will be assured that we will organise a Q&A if we're unable to answer all of your questions tonight. So now I would like to introduce you to Nat, our partner from Ternity Group Sleep Smart program.
Thanks, Susie, and thanks everyone for inviting me on tonight for the parenting session with Storyhouse. I really, really appreciate it. Just a little bit of a background in terms of what Ternity Group is. Ternity Group has been around since 2008, and we run 3 different programs. So we are our 3 business sort of models do look at and focus on that maternity and early learning education. They are our Nourish Baby, our Safe Sleep Space, and our Sleep Smart education program. So it is through the Sleep Smart program that I get to work with the wonderful educators at Storyhouse. In terms of what we do, we help manage and we collaborate with educators to help support them understand the social and emotional well-being of all our beautiful little people, but also helping them provide that beautiful, safe and secure sleep space and those vital transitions into sleep in such a busy world of early learning. We also help them just make sure that they're really implementing those key safe sleeping principles and recommendations that are governed by Red Nose Australia in making sure that our sleep and rest policies are up to date and that they can actually be able to implement those beautiful safe environments for your little ones. So we do that through an online program that the educators all sort of use and partake in, but we also run quarterly sessions with our sleep champions and centre management and other leaders, and it's a great time for all the Storyhouse educators to come together, have a little discussion of what's working well and what's not, and really sort of brainstorm other ideas that we can use in terms of looking at it from a child's infant mental health perspective. So I'm also a mother of 3. I also work in terms of working one-on-one with parents too, so I'm seeing both ends, the early educator and the busyness of that world when children are there, but also the challenges that sometimes we all seem to come across with our sleep with our little ones, especially in those first 3 years of life. So we do know that, you know, it's around 40% of children will have some type of sleep challenge in that first 3 years of life. So often that can be some nighttime unsettledness or a bit of bedtime resistance. So we're here tonight to really support you. So please use that chat box, and I'm happy to try and support you and answer any questions that you have, and we can sort of take it from there. So, I suppose, you know, just when we're looking at infants and toddlers and we're looking at that child, you know, in looking at early education as well as being at home, what are the common sleep challenges that we sort of see? So for infants, like they can vary from that early morning wake up to those really short sleep cycles that we call cat naps. Developmental milestones can really impact sleep as they especially learn that they're sitting and they're standing, those type of things. Dependent sleep associations can sometimes play a big role in some challenges to sleep, such as dumming management or, you know, being able or being fed to sleep or that rocking, those type of things. So that's what we really help support educators as well as families in moving towards independent sleep if that's what we're after. we do have a big philosophy. If something is working for your family, then it's not an issue. It's only an issue when it becomes a bit of a challenge for you, and then you need to sort of seek support, and we're here to provide those gentle strategies for you when you need it. Our toddlers, sort of challenges that we find our most common challenges with our toddlers are that bedtime resistance. You know, they've all of a sudden developed a lot of new skills. They've got that real drive to sort of want to have a little bit of power over their environment, and they really want to have that opportunity to assert that independence. So they've found their voice. They can, you know, they know that that word no. So, and they're masters of delay. So they can really bring in all those beautiful delaying tactics that can become a challenge when it's time for bed. Yeah.
So Nat, could you tell us a little bit how important, can you tell us how important pre-nap or wind down routines are, and what sorts of examples families could use to support that sound sleeping as well?
Yeah, sure. So when we're looking at that transition into sleep, sometimes that's what our infants and our toddlers can really struggle with. So a wind down routine or a pre-nap routine is that really creates that buffer from that, you know, exciting, active, awake world to that leading into sleep. And when we're looking at a wind down routine, it can benefit a pre-nap, so just before a nap, or even that evening routine as we're leading into sleep. It doesn't have to be a long series of events, but what really sort of is important is that predictability and that that offering of the consistent sort of steps or those cues to give that message that we are preparing for sleep. So it can be simple things like a bit of a cuddle, or the same sleep message or sleep song as we're going into a room. It could be, for our little ones, it could be popping them in a sleeping bag, you know, those type of things. It could be getting to, you know, being with our toddlers, it could be getting them involved in dimming the lights or preparing the sleep space ready for that rest, closing the curtains, saying good night to their teddies, that type of thing. But just making sure that we're really consistent. So it can be something that can be done out and about, and it can be something that we can do when we're at home. Yeah.
Sometimes I know as a parent I've struggled with getting a preschooler into bed who keeps creeping out.
Yeah.
Could you give us some strategy to support that?
Strategy? Yeah, sure. That's always the fun and games. I love the you know, I've got 3 children myself, and my third used to be the master of being able to sneak out of bed, and in the middle of the night we'd all of a sudden see this little being at the end of the bed and not know how she got there. But often it's the start of the night challenge when we think we've put them down, and we come out and celebrate, and then all of a sudden we turn around and there's somebody already there, you know, back again. So when we've got a little one that is trying to sort of come in and out and, you know, have a little bit of FOMO because I don't want to miss out on what's happening, really important when we're guiding them back into their sleep space, that it is, you know, there's not a lot of talking outside of their sleep space. So if they've come to have a visit, you've said good night, you've popped them into bed, 2 minutes later they're out coming to see you. Sometimes it's just a gentle holding their hand or picking them up and giving them a cuddle and then walking back into their space. And that's when we can sort of give them some sleep messages. It's time for sleep. This is where we go to sleep, you know, those type of things. And we do it in their sleep space. So we're trying not to give them a lot of attention when they're out of their space, but we can remind them what they're there for, what we're doing now, and we can actually do that when we are in that space where we want sleep to happen. So I can see we've got a few questions, Susie, but can you see those?
Not all of them, no.
Not all of them. Okay. All right. So I can see we've got one about a 15-month-old, and I think this might be the one. Is this the one about co-sleeping?
Yes.
And trying to get them to go into their own bed when you are room sharing and we've got a cot in the same room, which can be a challenge. And I totally hear you. And sometimes it's really hard for our toddlers, especially, to be able to move away from that co-sleeping space when they can sort of see you. So have a look at the placement of the cot in the room. If it's sort of really close to the bed and there's not much of an option of moving it around in that space, even just something simple like popping a chair in between your bed and the cot so that you can sort of provide that parental presence by the side of the cot instead of lying in bed would be a start, just to create a little bit of space. The other thing when we're looking at trying to support them to go into their cot, especially if they have been co-sleeping, will be about really working on that evening wind down routine and focusing on that part of the night first and trying to get them into the sleep at the start of the evening into their cot. And then, if there is some wake ups overnight and they're needing that support, or they're pointing to the bed and standing up and wanting to go into your bed, just making sure, one, that little one is warm enough, they're dressed warm enough in their with whatever they're wearing when they are in their cot, because often when they come into bed with us, they're getting that extra warmth and lovely and cozy and snuggly with us. So they're used to having that really warm temperature. So making sure that they're dressed appropriately so that they can settle well on their own. Making sure that you're really consistent with your little steps that you do while that you are supporting them in their sleep space. But if you do need to pick them up and give them a cuddle, and believe me, Susie and I know it can be really challenging at night time. We don't have a lot of energy left in our tank to keep going and going and going, and especially with a toddler. So if it gets to a point in the night where it's just getting too much and we can't do any more resettling and we need to just get that sleep under our belts, just make sure that we still offer them their cot first so that they know that this is the first option. If they're not really comfortable with that, then pick them up and pop them into bed with you. Would be that next step, just to end that experience and get some sleep. But whatever you do, if you are doing a pick up and a cuddle and a support, always re-offer the sleep space that you would like them to go into first as that option. So
Nat, could you share, we have a question around some resettling sleep strategies for a 6-month-old who might wake up after 30 minutes. Can you give us some strategies of how we can get them to either self-settle or we can help them settle?
Yeah, so that is, especially if it's during the day. Is that what, does it say anything like that, Susie? You're not sure? Yeah.
It actually doesn't give us a time, just 30 minutes.
So if it's daytime, it can, often that shorter sleep, those catnapping behaviors can happen. It's quite common. 6 months of age, we'll start to see that developmental sort of readiness for our littlies to start to learn how to link sleep cycles again. But sometimes it can take a little bit of effort from us. So when we are creating any type of sleep change, it's really important to remember that sometimes it is, obviously it's about consistency, but to create those beautiful neural pathways of change, that can sometimes take between 7 and 21 days of exposure to a new way. And whenever we're trying something new, we need to give it a red hot shot for about 3 or 4 days and then review it, see what's going on, what's working, and if little one's responding. If they are responding, then we can introduce the next part of our settling strategy. So always start off with little experiences. So for a 6-month-old who might be catnapping, let's just say, and waking after a 30-minute sleep, always look at how they're going off to sleep initially. If they're having that beautiful cuddle in arms and that rock in arms, like I've said before, that's not an issue if it's not an issue for you. But if they're waking 30 minutes later and expecting to have that cuddle and the rock and they've been popped in the cot, you might find it harder for them to settle back into sleep or resettle or link those sleeps. So making sure that we start our sort of sleep experience in the cot. It might mean that we need to pick them up and settle them in arms, but try and start, sing the same song, have a little bit of a sleep message in their cot first, give them some settling strategies, and be really consistent with what you do in your approach. So for example, you could do a little bit of voice comfort, a little bit of shushing, or a little bit of a sleep message or a song. Then come to the side of the cot and do some patting or repositioning, hand holding, head stroking, whatever we can and whatever our babies are accepting. And then if they're not managing that and we're not managing it, then offer that upright cuddle, that pick up and that calm, and see how they're going. And if they do calm and settle, that's a time where we can sometimes give them a little bit of a sleep message and then try again. One thing that's really important too, Susie, I suppose, when we're looking at settling children in the cot is that we look at how we're approaching that cot. So often as parents, we pop our babies down into the cot, and then when we need to go and do a resettle, we'll often go over the cot and try and do that resettling strategy. When we do that and we're going over the cot, the first instinct for our little one is to go, hey, pick me up. And then we're not sort of picking them up, and they can get quite unsettled by that. So try and sort of have a bit of a strategy that when we're going in and doing a resettle, or we're trying to comfort and, you know, support our child back to sleep, that we're approaching down low and from the side of the cot. But when we're ending an experience or we're offering a little bit of comfort, that we go over the cot and pick them up. So that's something just to be mindful of.
So Nat, I've heard about this aspect or concept called sleep association, and often, you know, our little people will go to sleep with a dummy or a soft toy or even a bottle or a breastfeed, and they go to sleep and then get put into their bed. That becomes that routine for that little person. Can you talk us through a little bit about how educators and families can work together to support really great sleep patterns for children?
Of course. So yeah, there's a few different types of sleep associations, Susie. So there's independent sleep associations where they're sort of led by the child. They're things that the child can comfortably do without a lot of support from carers or educators. And then there's dependent sleep associations. So they're the ones that are like a dummy or a bottle, or you know, needing to be rocked or swayed to sleep, those type of things, or in the pram. So when we're looking at trying to change things like that, or supporting a child more towards independent sleep, it will depend on the age of the child, but it's okay to sort of really do a bit of a gentle wean off. So, you know, when we're looking at an association of, say, rocking and cuddling to sleep, and we're at a stage where our little one's getting a little bit more heavy and we want them to try and learn how to sort of find their own comfy position in the cot to sleep, we call that nesting. It's really important as our children get a little bit older and they're a little bit more mobile, that they have the chance to find their own position of comfort for sleep. So they can do that by being placed in the cot when they're sort of in that quiet stage, or having a bit of a wind down time in the cot. So something for them to practice. But if we are doing some rocking and cuddling and things like that, sometimes it's just really making sure as carers and educators that we're really mindful of what's happening when we're rocking. So if we're rocking a little one and they're starting to calm in our arms, sometimes it's a really good time or opportunity to just still our movements and just offer that stillness. And we're still cuddling them, we're still giving them that support, but we're allowing that little one to learn how to drift into their deep sleep without a lot of movement. So just over the course of 3 or 4 days, just rocking and stopping and rocking and stopping, and seeing how that little one goes until they're really comfortable in just falling asleep in still arms. Because once we get to that stage, our little one's getting that confidence and being able to drift off to sleep. That last little bit of drifting off to sleep on their own. So then they can do that quite comfortably on a firm mattress themselves. So just sort of gently weaning off as an association like that can help. In terms of dummy management, it can feel like it's a rod for your own back sometimes when we're constantly replacing the dummy, and that can be very, very tricky. And it would depend on the age of a child. So around that 4 or 5 month mark, that's often when our littlies will learn to spit out the dummy and need us to help replace it back in. So if you've got a little one that age and they're constantly spitting out the dummy and we need to sort of go, they're waking up and needing it to be replaced, try and do some 3 or 4 little steps before you replace the dummy. It might be a shush, a hands on their little chest, a stroke of their face, and then popping the dummy in. Because in the nighttime, when they've woken up for the 6th time to get that dummy put in, you could be in your bed and just start the shushing, and that might just be enough for that little one to go, oh, hang on, mum's heard me, I'm okay, and then they can drift off to sleep. So yeah, if you're at that, you're in the thick of that stage where that dummy's coming out and you're constantly replacing it, try a few 3 or 4 quick little steps before you return that dummy, just to support them. Know that it is short-lived. You get to a point where they're around 7 months of age and we can start to teach our little ones to become independent with the dummy. So that's when a dummy can switch from becoming an independent tool, because we can start to give the dummy and put it in our little one's hands and guide it up to their mouth. So in the night time when they are calling out and needing that dummy, we can sort of guide their hand to where the dummy is and pop it over the dummy, and they can learn to bring it up to their mouth. And then it becomes something that they are in control of, and it doesn't become, it's fine for us. So as parents, I know if you're right in the thick of that dummy replacement era, there is light at the end of the tunnel. It's just that we need to get that little one developmentally ready.
I know sometimes too as well, Nat, sorry, I know sometimes too as well,
yeah.
Sorry, are you still?
Yes.
Yeah. I know sometimes we, ourselves, it's easier just to give your child a bottle and let them fall to sleep with the bottle, or
totally.
breastfeed and let them fall to sleep breastfeeding. Can you tell us, like, what would be the best little routine for best sleep practices, rather than allowing them to fall to sleep on the bottle or the breast?
Yeah, so even just having a little bit of space in between that is really important. So if it's like a nighttime or just before, after lunch type thing and they're due for a feed, to give them that feed a bit outside of the space before, so if we're, it might be in a chair in a lighter room before we go into a darker room, to really prepare them for that sleep. So putting a little bit of distance between a bottle and the breast and then going into sleep. If you've got a little one that's really struggling or has been used to feeding off to sleep or breastfeeding off to sleep, and you're at a stage where you're not sure what to do, remember to be, you can get to a stage where if you give them a feed and that they've started to get sleepy, popping them into an upright position as you walk over to the cot can sometimes just put one little step in between that feed and going off to sleep. And that can often break that feeding to sleep association. So looking at timings of feeds, setting it up so that if it is a cue to wind down, that it's sort of spaced out at least 20 minutes before the sleep is due. That can be really beneficial. But with our young ones, sometimes the feed will coincide with the sleep. So just making sure that we pop them in that upright position as we walk over to the cot, just to put a little step in between the feed and the sleep. And of course, with children that come to early learning, we're not able to lie a little one down and give them a bottle. And that's the same with when we're at home. We don't want to feed a little one on a flat surface. We don't want to prop a bottle up in their mouth while they're lying down. It's really important that they are on an incline while they are feeding. So, yeah.
So, Nat, we have a few questions here around sleep scheduling. So we have a few thoughts around when our children go to sleep later at night and then waking up later in the morning. How do we change that sleep schedule? Have you got some tips to share so that we can actually have our time as well in the evening?
Oh, totally. Yeah, no, and that's really, really important too. There's no, the later our little one goes to sleep, sometimes it can really, it has that flow-on effect in terms of us just needing a little bit of downtime and needing to be able to do that. So my advice to that is always have a look at the last sleep of the day and just see where that is in terms of if that's impacting the time that our little one's going to bed in the evening. If you feel that the sleeps in the day are okay and it's really just it's becoming a night issue where our little ones are just really struggling to go off to sleep, having realistic expectations in terms of managing it. So start off with a plan of starting the wind down routine 15 minutes earlier. Okay, and trying to aim to get that little one into bed 15 minutes earlier than what they usually do. If you can do that for a couple of nights, that often starts to change their little sleep window. And if they start to manage that, then what we can often find is then after 3 or 4 nights, we can bring it forward by 15 more minutes. And we can do that by 15-minute increments until we get to that sweet spot where they're going to bed at a decent time, so that then we can have some sort of downtime ourselves. It's really hard to do that messaging, Susie, because younger children are still often on a 24-hour sort of rhythm of sleep. And it's not until they get a little bit older that we'll see that traditional bedtime of that 6:30, 7 o'clock mark. So just having realistic expectations around that. But yeah, if you ever need to change any type of sleep patterns, always do it gradually and over a longer period of time, and it often becomes a lot more successful and a lot more consolidated.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other questions there that you can see?
Yes, there is. There's a question here about a little one, 8 weeks old, just sleeping for 6 hours at a time. And is that okay if they're not having a feed for that long time?
Wow, that's amazing. So 8 weeks old and you're getting that a long block of sleep of 6 hours. So in terms of a little one up to 12 weeks of age and around, it's usually about that 8-week mark that we can often start to see. Sometimes what we'll find before that 6-hour block of sleep is there will be a little bit of cluster feeding and a bit of general unsettledness, and then all of a sudden they'll do a really long block of sleep. So, as long as everyone's happy with weight gains and babies feeding really frequently at every other time of the day, it is quite common that we can see a longer block once in a 24-hour period. So you're already getting a 6-hour block, which is huge. You'll often find after that baby may return to sort of 2-3 hourly feeds. But it is, so it is quite common to have one long block of sleep. And obviously it will just be making sure that you've linked in with your community and everyone is happy with weight gains, baby's feeding really well, and the health of bub is going okay. And if all that's going well, you should get the green light to let them do that.
So Nat, how early should we start with our little people to start a sleep routine?
So that's a really good question, Susie, because often we'll find that littlies can start to show us a pattern of events or a pattern in terms of being a little bit more consistent with their awake times, around that sort of between 10 to 12 weeks, we can often start to see that they are showing us a little bit more consistency with the amount of time they can stay awake for during the day. And that can help us establish a little pattern of event, but it's not a full strict routine. So when we're looking at supporting a little one or getting them onto a bit more of a manageable sort of rhythm of the day, we often have a lot more success when our littlies are around 6 months of age. So 6 months of age, they're quite consistent in terms of how long that they could stay awake for. They're often really supported, or it works well with their rhythm to be offered sort of a 3 sleep a day pattern. And those 3 sleeps can often look like sort of 2 sleep cycles linked together twice a day. So it might be an hour and a half twice a day, and then a little cat nap at the end of the day. And often by 6 months, we can really support that in making sure that that can be a little bit more consistent. So
we have a question around some 2-year-olds.
Yeah.
So with our little 2-year-olds, how can we know whether our little 2-year-olds are having like night tremors, especially when they've gone from a pattern of sleeping, 12 hours, and then all of a sudden they're waking up upset, 2 or 3 times a night? And what strategies can we do to support them to feel safe and self-settle?
Yeah, it's always really, our beautiful toddlers, all of a sudden their imagination comes to life. They've got a lot going on, and sometimes obviously it's that winding down and that leading into sleep can sometimes spark that imagination to go into a bit of overdrive, and then that in turn we can see it play out through the night. Often too, it's after 2 years of age, and you guys will know this. So when 2-year-olds start to develop an imagination, or they start to develop fears, things that have never worried them before will all of a sudden impact them. So for example, if you have a little one that was quite happy to toddle down the hall in the pitch black to go into their room, in the evening, and not even think twice about that, when they start to develop fears or their imagination and they start to really have vivid dreams, you'll find they'll be a little bit more resistant to being able to do that. They will ask for the light to come, or they'll say, "Mummy, come," those type of things, because all of a sudden, though, that little fear or their imagination is really developing. So night terrors are very common for our littlies, especially around, it's more the 3 to 5 time, the night terrors. So nightmares are when our littlies will wake up. It's often the second half of the night, Susie, that this happens, and they'll tend to be able to recall or be able to let you vocalize what they might be concerning them. So they might be crying out and letting you know something. And without, we can never pick with how nightmares are going to play out. It could be just from a little story that they've read, that something in that story is just, sparked their imagination, and they've had a dream about it and it's not been comfortable. So nightmares, the best thing we can do is go and support them, provide them with that safe message. "You're okay, Mummy's here, lie down, it's time for sleep, one more cuddle, one more kiss, here's Teddy," that type of thing, and give them that reassurance. If they need you to stay, then stay beside the bed or the cot. Try not to lie in their space with them, but sitting beside them. It just helps them still have their own position of comfort, their own sleep space, and it helps you be able to get out of their space a little bit easier. Night terrors are often they are often genetically linked, and night terrors often they come to light usually in the first part of the night. So children that have night terrors will often wake at a similar time every night, and they will be really hard to rouse. And actually it's advised not to rouse a child when they're in a night terror, which can be very challenging for families, because you will have a little bub that's quite hysterical, and they're not really aware that they are at that point. So you can make sure that they're safe. If you've got a little one that's in a bed and they're standing up, or they're doing walking around, go and pick them up and gently guide them back into their space. But waking them up can sometimes be really confronting. So it's actually just sort of managing them until that night terror is over. Our little ones don't remember the night terror, but it can feel like that can be very, very hard. So it's not often with night terrors that a little one will have it every night. Often night terrors will spike if there's a little bit of sickness coming, or a bit of a developmental leap, and that can happen for a week at a time, and then they might not see them again, and then a month later it will happen again.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. But if you're ever concerned or anything like that, especially in terms of a night terror, go and have a chat to the doctor, just to make sure that everything's okay, and that you've got that peace of mind. There's a lot of great information on the Royal Children Hospital website too, about nightmares versus night terrors, and just some general management on that too, if it ever comes to that and you want some more support.
Nat, could you share with us, if I've got a 10-month-old who I'm rocking to sleep and putting them in the cot, and they are quite, hysterical and fearful, and wanting to climb out of the cot. What's the advice you give? And should they move into a bed at that age, or should persevere with them in the cot?
Yeah, it's always a tricky one, isn't it? Because, with Red Nose Australia guidelines, it does sort of say to try and keep a little one in a cot till about between 2.5, 3.5 years of age, but only if it's safe. So if a little one is trying to climb out and a cot is no longer safe, then we need to review that sleep space. So often with a 10-month-old, it is a bit young to transition to sort of a floor bed, but that little one better than me. So often we'll find that, it might mean and some cots can do this, where we can really lower the base of the cot so it's right down low, so that they don't have the ability to climb over. If you can do that with your space, then that's sometimes a really good peace of mind in terms of helping that. Now, for a little one that has a cot aversion in terms of not wanting to start their sleep experience in a cot, they want to be able to have that cuddle and that connection. And it's just because that's all they've known. So, and that's what they prefer. So sometimes it will just take a little bit longer. So to support them, sometimes making sure that you do some incidental experiences during the day by popping them into the cot when it's nice and bright and they're awake. It might be popping them in while you sort of just going to put washing away, or you're walking around their room, but some lovely little incidental experiences where you pop them in. It's not a big deal. You're having a chat. They can stand up and cruise around that cot and just sort of get their bearings about it when they're fully awake, and then matter-of-factly picking them up and taking them out again. That's all. Just doing some incidental experiences like that to get them to sort of accept it a little bit, and then start the sleep experience in their cot. So it might be just saying, putting them down and singing a song or reading a story while you're sitting on one side and they're sitting in the cot, and then picking them up and giving them that cuddle, and then slowly weaning off the cuddle with that rocking and stopping. And eventually you will definitely get there. Often you'll get a 10-month-old and they're just on that cusp of wanting to cruise and take off. So you'll often find that you'll get to a stage where they're pushing away from you when you're trying to give them that support. And that's when you'll gently just pop them back in. So give yourself some time. Make sure you do some accidental day experiences and a lot of sort of modeling and starting the sleep experience there. But don't be too concerned if when you're initially bringing those changes in, that you do still end up with some in-arms cuddling and support, because it can take a little while, and that's okay.
So Nat, also 2.5-year old will usually have a routine where they want to continue the cuddles to sleep. How can we get them to self-settle?
Yeah, sure. So that's a really good one. With our toddlers, and especially our toddlers have that beautiful ability they can pick up on change so quickly. And then when you sort of think, oh no, we've created a rod for our own back, then we need to sort of get things back on track. It feels like it can take ages to get them back on track. So just remember, with toddlers, they're really sort of masters of wanting to make sure that boundary is still the same and it's still really consistent and they're really safe. So one thing that we'll always do when we talk about toddlers with parents or our educators is just remembering that with toddlers, with anything that they do, is that they're always trying to make sure that the message is still the same. So it's like us if we go on a ride, we're going on a roller coaster at a theme park, and the first thing that happens is that we get that safety barrier popped on us. And we've actually seen the attendant put the safety barrier on. We've seen them lock it into place. But the first thing that we do is we'll push back on it just to double check that is, safe. And it's almost what our toddlers do. They know that it's sleep time and they know that they need to go to sleep on their own, but they're going to keep just double checking, making sure, are you sure, Mum, that you can't come and lie with me? And they'll keep doing that. So one thing to do with an older child is to talk about sleep, but not right before sleep. It might be in the day, in the play. I find role modeling really good in terms of creating change for toddlers. So having Teddy out for a play and, oh, he's tired, let's put him down to bed, and modeling what you'd like to see happen, and sort of seeing what your 2.5-year-old does with Teddy helps sort of get them to understand through their play changes that you might want to bring in. But if you're having a toddler that wants to do the cuddle and have you sit down and help them fall asleep, one thing first would be try and move off their sleep space, if that's sitting in a chair beside the bed, so that when, that they're being able to find their own position of comfort and they're not feeling that sort of change in pressure when you leave that bed. The other thing is create a catchphrase. So our littlies are very clever, or they do, that goodbye and good night does spark a huge reaction sometimes. So creating a little catchphrase, I'll be back in a second, or I'm just getting a tissue. Those type of little phrases, if we say them while we leave the room briefly and we return quite quickly, it helps our toddlers understand that they have to manage on their own for just a couple of seconds. So if you've popped your little one down, you've said goodnight, you leave the room and they're calling for you and they want you to come in, sit beside the bed. If they're calm and quiet and they're just settling while you're there and you feel like they're okay, just use one of those little catchphrases and move out of the room. Now, it might just mean that you go out of the room and 2 seconds later you're back at the doorway and they're sitting up in their bed waiting for you, which can happen when we initially start this. And they're sitting up in their bed looking and waiting for you. That just matter-of-factly from the door, say, lie down so I can help you, and come closer to the bed and just sit there for a little bit. But that go and that return and getting them confident in managing on their own for those couple of seconds can work really well. So just supporting them that way, within reason as well. With our toddlers, they've got staying power. We're tired. It's important to have an end point. So if something's no longer working and you've tried a new way and it's just not getting you anywhere, resort back to how you need to finish off just to get them off to sleep. We can try again another day.
So Nat, what would you suggest for a stage where the 3-year-old is dropping their full day sleeps, but the evening is quite horrific, and we have lots of you know tiredness. Is it worth letting them sleep for 30 minutes and then waking them during the day, or what ideas would you suggest to help families to do that?
If they're really struggling in terms of getting to their evening sleep, and it will just depend on the age and how the pattern of your day is going. Okay, but so you've got two options. The one option is to get them into bed really early, and seeing how that works. So if they've usually been going to bed at sort of 7:38 and they're just not cutting it and they're in bed by 6:30, that's fine. The other thing is, if you're at a stage where they are dropping that middle of the day sleep, but they're still at a stage where they may need it, and that sleep becomes a bit of a danger nap, and it's sort of like that 4:30, 5 o'clock time, then that's probably when we would look at still implementing that quiet time after lunch. And if that meant that there was a little bit of sleep happening then, it wouldn't matter if they had a shorter sleep then, because they would still have enough wake time leading up into the evening to make sure that they could manage really well. So for any little one that is dropping down or cutting out that day sleep, it's still really important that we provide them with a period of quiet. They need to still have that period of quiet. They have to have that ability to be able to rest their bodies. But children that we've got studies to show, and there's a great little thing that's going around on Facebook actually about baby sleeping in the 1950s, and how they would all sleep on the floor after their lunch, because it's really important for how our children process and understand or make sense of the learning that they've done, and that's how they can create their memory and be able to understand that. So if you are in that period where a danger nap has been happening, and it's been happening consistently at 4:30, 5 o'clock, because they want to drop that day sleep, be consistent with quiet time in the middle of the day. If there happens to be a sleep at that time, it's less likely to affect the evening. They still should be able to go to sleep okay in the evening if that happens.
So should we be waking children after a certain time now?
So that's a really tricky one, especially not for our little ones. Okay, so this is the thing, and I know with early learning it's always really, really tricky. But waking a child in the middle of a deep sleep can really set up a really challenging or time for them in the afternoon. So we find, and when speaking with a lot of parents, waking a child up between a sleep cycle when they're not really ready and they're really needing that extra sleep, it can result in them having less enjoyment in the afternoon, being able to process their emotions, and the ability to change from activity to activity because they're still not well rested. So being able to have that beautiful consolidated rest when they are showing us those tired cues without being woken is really important in terms of how they manage the process of the day. I know we're speaking with a lot of families that children attend early learning, and one of the things that can be a challenge is that if a child has these beautiful sleeps in their early learning service, which happens, their life is busy, there's so much going on when they're there, so they will show those tired cues a lot earlier. They will need that sleep. but often families will feel the impact in the evening, and they'll sort of feel like their little one's not ready to go to sleep like they usually do. My advice would be that if your little one is having beautiful rest when they're at their early learning service, when it comes to the evening, try and be really consistent with the time that you offer their downtime. It would still remain the same. It might just take your little one another 25 to 30 minutes to fall asleep, but still create that beautiful quiet time at that time, because sometimes it's all just about them processing and they need to just go through the day's events. And if a little one can do that without a lot of help from you, that rest time is still a really magic time. So it might not be that they're going to sleep at 7:30 like they usually do, but they're still in bed at 7:30 and they might settle at 8:15, but they're okay. That wind down time is still really important.
Mm-hmm. Nat, could you share with us, we've have a few questions. Sorry, we have a few questions around children who have sleep regression and how to get them back into a pattern, for example, when they're sick, or even if they've been away overseas on holidays, and sometimes that can be a real struggle. What's the best tips that you could give us to help settle our children back into a routine as soon as they can?
Of course. So when we're talking about regressions, it's always really tricky. Lots of babies won't, there is some regressions that can really affect our littlies. Others, we won't even know they've gone through them. So we call them brain progressions as well, because they're going through a huge spurt of development. So when we're looking at progressions, it is quite common that some can last for up to 2 weeks, and then others, we won't even see them. But when our littlies are sick, or even if they're in the middle of a regression, things like that, it's important, especially for a regression, it's important that we stick to our series of events. So the same type of wind down routine, the same pattern of settling steps that we're going to use as we're placing them into bed, but having realistic expectations around it. So in the middle of a brain progression, it may take us 2 or 3 times going through our settling strategies before our little one goes, you know what, mum and dad have got this, nothing's changed, I'm safe, and they eventually fall asleep. So it's always a challenging time as parents, because we'll often second guess everything that we're doing and, this isn't working. But it's actually just because our little one's gone through such a huge stage of development that they are being able to, predict and understand what's happening, and they're not really happy about it. They'd rather be up partying with us. But in terms of sickness and things like that, when our littlies are sick, it's important to follow their lead with sleep. So if they're needing that extra sleep, provide it for them. When you're in the middle of a sickness, it is just about making sure that they get better and that we're trying to get that rest under their belt. Once they're well, then we can start offering sleep like we were when they were well before they got sick. So that's where we would start our sleep again. And, even speaking today, I've been speaking to a lot of parents, and, it's often the case is that our little one is sick, but unfortunately they've made the whole family sick. So parents are not on top of their game either when a little one is sick, because they're often battling some type of illness as well. So being kind to yourself, just getting through it as best you can. And then when everyone's on the other side, we can start sleep off where we sort of were beforehand.
So Nat, we have a few more. Sorry, we have a few more questions, but we won't be able to answer them all. But we will be working in partnership with you to put some videos together or a fact sheet, and we will make sure that we can send that out to everybody. Is there one piece of advice you would give us to support our sanities as caregivers around sleep before we?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good one, Susie. And obviously After this session, please, you know, if I can see the questions, or if Susie grabs them, I will try and answer them as best as I can, and Susie will share them with you all. Yeah, it's just, I think the main take home as caregivers is to be kind to ourselves. We can be, you know, we can meet a little one where they're at, but every little being is unique. It's like us, we're also very unique. So sleep needs will range. And if we're just gentle with ourselves and accept that every day can be a little bit different, it's still okay. So, you know, try not to be too rigid in our approach, but be prepared for a little bit of flexibility, I think, especially for those first 3 years. Everything's all over the shop, but yeah, be kind to yourself, guys.
So Nat, if we have anybody who's on the call who would like to reach out and seek some more advice, are they able to contact yourself?
Yes, they can. They can definitely do that. So the best way is to jump online to probably the Safe Sleep Space website. And Sleep Smart too, but Safe Sleep Space has got all our information. There's beautiful blog posts there. We have consultants that they can chat to. We have video and podcasts as well that we've been involved in. So there is a wealth of information there for our parents. Also, our beautiful educators, they've got a lot of our information as well that they can actually download and support the parents with that they're working with. And they're a really great resource to chat to, because they know your little one too, and they're able to sort of be able to relate and work with you in terms of providing that consistent care. So make sure that you know, as a point of call for parents, that you are linking in and talking to your educators, because they are a wealth of knowledge as well. So
lovely. Thank you so much. I'm aware of the time, and I'm sure there's some little people in their beds waiting for cuddles to sleep. So I do apologise for our technical issue, but I hope that you have enjoyed the session today, and continuing our Storyhouse Live sessions in October, where we will be partnering with Nutrition Australia to share their wealth of knowledge around supporting the positive food responses for your children. Nat will also be continuing with us in the future and sharing some specific aspects around sleep. So thank you so much for your time, Nat, and thank you everybody for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you everybody. Take care. Thanks, Susie.